Alderman Conwell's absence. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. If no questions, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, thank you. And are there any public comments related to the agenda?
No, no one is signed in.
All right, then I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the February 20th meeting. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. If there's no question, comments, or concerns, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. The minutes have been approved, and I will turn it over to you to read into the record the matters referred to committee.
Ordinance number 2018-0001, providing for modifications to the adoption of the Cuyahoga County Human Resources Personnel Policies and Procedures Manual.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. I understand today we are going to hear from a few directors who will speak to the matter as it relates for paid hour for hour beyond 40 hours a week. So if there's anyone that would like to step forward and give us a little bit of background, or the first director, I will welcome you to the podium, please. Please state your name for the record.
Thank you. Douglas Dykes, Human Resources. What we've asked is we've asked some of the directors where the straight time beyond 40 hours affects their departments. We've asked them to come in and make the business case for this particular procedural guideline. And we'll hear from them in this order: Dennis Kennedy and representatives from the fiscal department, Brandy, and I believe she has a representative here, Walter from HHS, and then Dr. Gilson will bring up the rear.
All right, thank you very much. I guess the floor is now yours, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to everybody. Just briefly like to touch on the policy related to payment of overtime to exempt positions as it affects the fiscal office. Our primary issue in this regard is with the project work that is currently being conducted related to the 2018 appraisal. And we have right now 4 employees that are assigned to the appraisal that fall into the category of exempt positions that are currently receiving the benefit of straight time payments when they're in excess of currently of 45 hours. Just to give you a little perspective as to how we came up with this, we are required every reappraisal to submit a project plan to the state of Ohio that lists all the different components of the reappraisal, and the state then will authorize our total expense that's allocated for the 2018 appraisal in terms of expenses that were to be incurred either in 2017 and 2018. On that project cost summary that was submitted to the state, we had a project total of $661,800 related to comp time payments to, at that time, we had identified the possibility of up to 23 employees that would be eligible for that comp time. As I said earlier, currently we are only offering that to 4 employees, so that's considerably less than what the project plan had contemplated. But I did want you to know that we had included some estimates for expense related to that. The reason is we do the appraisal primarily almost 99+% in-house. That is different than a lot of different other counties in the state. And by doing so, we feel that we can keep the cost of the reappraisal down considerably from what other counties spend when they completely farm out all the consulting work related to the appraisal. Just as a point of reference, for the Franklin County appraisal that was conducted in 2017, their total cost through an outside vendor was $9.1 million. Hamilton County in 2017 had a contract for $6.3 million. Currently, our project cost for the 2 years again, consistent with the plan that was submitted to the state of Ohio, is just a shade over $4 million. So we are doing the entire reappraisal at a size in terms of parcel counts equal or in excess of those other two counties for considerably less. In the case of Franklin, we're doing it for more than 50% less. So the focus has been on using our internal staff to accommodate all the work. And unfortunately, because of the fact that things are compressed, we have to have a preliminary appraisal submitted to the state by June 1st, but our internal deadlines right now are along the lines of the first week of April. So there are situations that require these four individuals in the appraisal department to work extra hours to keep the project on course. And to date, we are satisfied with the results. We don't anticipate being late in terms of our filings with the state. But that would not be possible without these folks dedicating the additional hours to the project. So as I said, that we're managing the project in-house as opposed to putting out a bid for it. And by doing so, we're considerably less than the expenses, total expenses for other large counties in Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Kitty. Let the record reflect that Councilwoman Nan Baker is also present. I will now open it up to questions, comments, or concerns from the committee. Councilman Miller.
Director, why don't we just hire another person or two on a temporary basis to work straight time rather than paying people to work more than 45 hours a week?
Councilman, we had looked into that last year when the project was contemplated. The issue that we have, as with a lot of aspects of what goes on, not only in the fiscal office but the whole county, is we have a concentrated source of institutional knowledge. So bringing people in from the outside may not necessarily contribute to the longer term value of completing the project either quicker or more efficiently. We are looking to propose and will be coming with a board of control for a small contract for some commercial appraisers, because we feel we need to bolster that area up because of some outside issues that have come up related to some health issues for some of the people that are involved. But we did look at that, but we thought at the time that we could accommodate it, and we have limited it to only 4 people as opposed to the original 23.
Madam Chair, Director, how many people in the fiscal office are exempt?
Councilman, I do not have that figure off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I could get it for you.
The people in the fiscal office who are exempt, are they truly salaried in the sense that if they hit a slow time and they're really good at their work and they can get their work done in 30 hours or 35 hours that week, that there's no problem with that? Or are they hourly light in the sense that they have to either punch a clock or assert that they've done 40 hours of work in the week?
Mr. Miller, there is nobody, to the best of my knowledge, in the county that's totally exempt. Since we are awarded, and I've had this issue come up in other jurisdictions I've worked in, county employees are awarded leave time by the hour, therefore they're expected to account for their time by the hour. So with regard to your question about if somebody completes their duties prior to the expiration of the 40 hours, no, they are not allowed to leave. They're not true salaried. The only way anybody here would be true salary, like when I was the director of the Lottery Commission, I didn't receive any vacation time, sick leave. I just got paid for the year, and I was expected to do the job, whether that took 60 hours a week, and if there was light times, I could take off with the approval of the governor's office, but I was not awarded time to support my employment. Here, everybody is awarded time in hourly increments, so they have to account for their time in that regard.
So, Madam Chair, Director, it seems to me that part of the problem why this has become such a big issue is that we're thinking of these exempt employees as salaried, but actually they're not. It seems like they're basically another form of hourly worker with a little different method of timekeeping, but not salaried. Is that a fair statement?
I would agree with that, Councilman. In my experience, I'm not a FLSA expert, but there's a separate provision for governmental employees because they are awarded their time on an hourly basis. True salary means you get paid if you don't show up, you get paid if you work 100 hours. You get paid the same payment. You're entitled to that. That's not the case here. I would caveat the remarks too, which I neglected to address originally, is in the context of the existing personnel policy, people, exempt employees that are eligible to earn exchange time are capped at 40 hours. Once they hit that 40 hours, it expires and it can be taken away from them. That was one of the restrictions that we felt was an impediment to getting the appraisal done, because it doesn't do us any good to not pay people and just give them comp time or exchange time, because we don't want them to have to take the time off immediately while they're working on the project. So this decision that was done in conjunction with the Human Resource Department was within the constraints of the existing policy. If that ceiling was raised, it may then give us an opportunity to just accrue exchange time. But for people that are going to be working a lot of hours towards this project, it really doesn't do them any good if they lose hours almost immediately upon their accrual.
Madam Chair, Director, do you know of anyone at the county that's even close to being truly salaried?
Without being held to accuracy, I would think the elected officials, most probably. But I do not know that for a fact, but those would probably be the only ones that I know who are not awarded leave time by the hour.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Gallagher.
You mentioned existing policy, within the parameters of the existing policy. Can you take me through that policy?
Councilman, I don't have the HR manual, but there is a provision in the manual where county employees are allowed to earn exchange time on an hour-for-hour basis above 40 hours worked. But the amount that can be maintained in a bank for their use is capped at 40 hours.
Okay. And that's policy we passed,
That is the existing.
The existing.
The existing one, yes, sir.
and that was proposed.
Correct.
Okay. When you came on board, were you offered any special compensation, considering your expertise and what your job title was going to be and your responsibilities?
And in
Any
special
perks? Were you treated differently? Did you feel special?
I always feel special.
You look special.
Thank you, sir. I did at the time that I came here, the existing policy manual did not have credit for additional vacation time. I told prior to my employment that I couldn't leave a job that I had 5 weeks vacation time to come for 2. I was told I would get 3 weeks of exchange time that first year, which I did. And that has been it.
And who offered you that?
That was through the executive's office in terms of the communication prior to my accepting the position.
And you say you have the 4 employees that, once they hit their 40, they got paid for that?
Councilman, I have 4 employees now that are eligible
Right.
for this plan to pay them once they get above 45 hours.
45? And that seems reasonable. I think we would agree with that. If you're going to be above and beyond, you're out in the field, you're doing your job, and rather than pull it up, stop where you're at, and you can do 2 more streets or whatever it is, that you get paid a little bit more for being out there an hour or 2 more. So that seems to me to be reasonable.
I think in terms of what we use it for, Councilman, particularly only related to a project, I would not say it's something that we want to do day for day for everybody, but because there's a finite time period in which to complete the project, sometimes there's hitches, sometimes things come up. So I think for these 4 folks, it's imperative that we have the ability to do that. If we hold them to the rule that exists now, which is the 40-hour ceiling, there's really no incentive for them to keep working, as you said.
Okay, thank you.
To that point on the 40-hour ceiling, is there an expiration or a time frame in which they are allowed to utilize that 40 hours?
I believe 6 months.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair,
Yes, Councilman, did you have a question? Okay, yes, Councilman.
I'll defer to the council president and then
No,
go.
you're fine. Vice Council President Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Mr. Kennedy, you articulated the 40 hours cap, and I get that. You know, on the ground, out in the field, you don't necessarily want people to stop working. We can look at other departments, similar scenarios. If a social worker has to remove children from the home and it's 4:30 and it's time to get off, they still have to triage. They have to, get them in a foster home or a relative's home, and they just can't necessarily take off. But the problem is, for us, we have to determine how to make this employee handbook. Do we just say straight 40 hours, or do we find a solution? So if council looks for a solution, I'm not too, we will determine what it is, but it might not be too far from what you've already done. The problem is, it wasn't in your policy. So my question for you, and ultimately for everyone in the administrative department, is why let it get to this point where you're asking for forgiveness as opposed to permission? Why not think about making a policy change to do what works? Where was the thinking around actually coming back to this body, which is our role, and saying we think this works better, and we like to make a legislative change in our department? Well, did that conversation ever come up for you, or thought, that very concept?
Councilman, we did in our conversations with the HR folks who were helpful during this process, recommend that whatever policy we were pursuing would be at some point approved by the legislative body. That's the understanding that we had, that was going to be part of a new manual that was being prepared. I can't speak for the timing of that, but when we had these discussions, it was back in last summer when our project started. And at that point, we had necessitated the issue or identified the issue of that we have to tell these folks what they're doing. And I would like to say, in terms of the reference about being in the field, and that's a day-to-day thing. I mean, if somebody has to stay an extra hour to do something, I have no problem letting them flex their schedule at some future point in a week to accommodate that hour. We're not talking about kind of day-to-day routine operations of the county. This is a project with a firm commitment in terms of the timeline. I don't have any exceptions or ability to go to the state of Ohio and say, I'm not going to be done on time. And in fairness to the public and to all the communities that we serve in terms of what the values are, we have to hit that mark. Now, certain things come up. Like I said, we've had medical issues with some of the folks that are working on it. Those things are unforeseen. There's technical glitches every now and then. So I think the fact that we have limited our participation in this particular segment to only 4 people, it shows our responsibility to it. But we operated under the assumption that was going to be part of a new policy that was submitted to the council.
Also, I heard what sounded like maybe you had a managerial option out in the field. It appears that's not the case.
Most of the folks that are here are upper management level positions. I mean, I have our director of appraisal here, if you'd care to get some more detail on that, but they're kind of the top folks that keep the whole project running. You know, they're all at the Metzenbaum Center right now. We took them all out of this building and pooled everybody together, so the complete focus of what's going on is towards the reappraisal. We have our very small remaining skeleton crew that handles day-to-day updates here, but everybody is kind of set up as on a team concept at a separate facility to continue with the focus on completing the project.
Okay, thank you.
I just have one more question, and I'm going to turn it over to Council President Brady. I think I feel like that the question needs to be asked as it relates to the 23 employees and going down to the 4. Can you just elaborate too on how it went from 23 to 4? What was the original proposal that gave you the opportunity to reduce it by such a drastic number?
Councilwoman, we prepared the plan basically on a worst case scenario up front. And also what had happened, because the negotiated temporary policy related to the 45 hours of work, and any time off that's taken against that 45 hours doesn't count as an active pay work. So if somebody has a sick day or they have an appointment scheduled and they're off on a Monday, they actually have to work 53 hours before they earn this. So a large number of the staff that were eligible chose not to participate in that because of the restrictions.
Thank you. I think that might help also. Council President Brady and then Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. No, I just wanted to ask Mr. Kennedy, the 4 appraisers, then those are residential appraisers or not?
Mr. Brady, they are upper management staff for
Oh, okay.
so
they're coordinating the entire appraisal process.
Yes, sir.
And so your appraisers are out in the field, and there's like 3 categories or something of them.
Yes, sir.
They're contracted out. We have contracts out for that. You were talking about we had saved money by having these folks be in house. But the other appraisers, which would be the most of them, all of them, are we contract out for that?
We have a small group of appraisers that we contract out to that work strictly for this time period related to the appraisal. We don't bring them on as employees. We don't have benefit or pension expense. That amount was brought before, I believe, the Board of Control to get that approval, or through council, I'm not sure. But those folks are just here until probably the summer, and then they'll be done. They get paid on a per parcel basis, so the majority of their work is related to residential properties of like in the same demographics, so that there isn't a lot of dispersion.
Yeah, right. Okay, thanks.
Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I just have a question on the strategy of keeping the appraisals in-house and trying to compare between what it would cost to outsource it versus what's being done in-house. And the term exempt, I guess we've all just learned that means hourly. That means that you will work those 40 hours regardless. And you can't take 35 and then think that you're not going to be called for the other 5. So I guess my question is, why not just reorganize? Sorry, I have a cold. And just have everyone paid hourly. And if you have a project like this and you need them for an extra 5 hours, why not just pay them time and a half and figure that into the cost?
Ms. Baker, some of the classifications that not only these employees, but other employees, particularly in the fiscal office, are in, is the direct result of the migration from the change in government, because everybody fell into different classifications. In some cases, those were probably not conducted correctly. We're still dealing with piecemeal appeals of people's classifications. So if somebody came to me 5 years ago and says, you're exempt, I'm exempt, whereas maybe 2 weeks before that in the prior form of government, I was not, but there was determinations made on classes of people. I would probably defer that question to the human resource folks as to how people ended up in whatever classifications they are. I'm just trying, I have what I have, and I'm just trying to get the appraisal done.
Thank you.
Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair, my question now becomes a follow-up question, as I was going in exactly the same direction as my colleague, Ms. Baker, in a slightly different way. I would like if I could ask a follow-up question of the HR director. And I know this is a question that you probably could expound upon for the next hour, so don't. But since we've established that almost everybody we've got is kind of hourly, it's one form of hourly or another form of hourly. My question is if you could give us a very brief tutorial on the legalities of what distinguishes someone who's exempt from the payment of overtime as opposed to someone who's not exempt.
Well, Councilman Miller, I was right on board with giving you this, but you said the legalities. And so I'm not going to try to dive into that. But if you don't mind, I'll ask our Director of Employee and Labor Relations to come up and give you a brief tutorial.
Ed Morales for Human Resources. Thank you. I promised to make it brief. I know that I've not done that in the past. So, okay. The Fair Labor Standards Act provides for the exempt and non-exempt classifications. And I think the provisions that are in the handbook are intended to explain that to employees. Exempt employees are those who have particular job duties that either because of what is known as an administrative exception, professional exception, there's a technology, computer personnel exception, management level exception are deemed exempt. So administrative or executive, in addition to an exemption for computer personnel, IT personnel, and other specific exemptions that are listed in the law. Those individuals are considered to be salaried and are not required, as long as they earn at a certain threshold that's in a law, earn enough salary that justifies the exception, and do not receive payment of overtime for over 40 hours worked. But those individuals who do not fall within those categories, administrative, executive, et cetera, qualify then for overtime for hours worked over 40, in a nutshell.
Thank you.
Councilman Gallagher.
Yeah, I think you can stay on that, but I'll have a question for the director. See, I think when we get to these exemptions is where I have a problem, is we're defining who counts and who doesn't, who's superior and who's inferior, and I really have a problem with that. I come from a world where I was the employee. I come from a world where that junk was pulled on us. We weren't professionals. The professionals didn't have to sign in. The professionals didn't have to do a time card. But those that weren't professional, we had a time card. We had to sign in. And we were held accountable. That's where I really struggle with all these exemptions. I just wonder, can we get to a point where everybody's treated equally, regardless of position, and move forward? Or is that so convoluted? Or have we gotten to a point where, because of contracts and superiority complexes that are now becoming realities, we can't do that?
Yeah, I think the spirit of the law, the intention of the federal law is just to protect employees from being overworked and to make sure that individuals who are considered relatively low wage earners are paid appropriately for time worked over 40. And the notion, and this is an old law, 1930s, the notion when the law was passed was that you had certain individuals in higher paying professions who we're not going to ask businesses to pay time and a half to, because they already make a lot, relatively. But those low wage earners should be protected so that they're not abused, and so that they should be paid time and a half for hours worked over 40. And again, these are federal classifications.
And it seems to me, and I understand it's an old law, but it seems to me the law that was meant to protect those at the lower end is now being used to abuse those at the lower end. At least that's how I see it. In that, others at the top are treated differently. There are different rules for different people. I got a problem with that. And maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me. And I'll live with that. For Mr. Dykes, have we considered in Cuyahoga County a 4-day week, 10-hour days, which would help, I think, alleviate some of the issues we're having with overtime?
Councilman, we've had some dialogue about that at the within HR. Did we consider it for this particular revision of the handbook? No, but it is something.
I think you better get ready for it, because I think it could be, whether you like it or you don't like it, and your opinion actually does matter to me. I think it's going to help let us get over some of these overtime issues and issues where people are working extra hours. I've heard the argument against, we're government. But yet again, I hear your argument and others saying, we've got to be like the public sector or the private sector. Well, if it's good for one, it's good for the other. And I personally think a 10-hour work day, 4 days a week could work in this county. And I don't buy the fact, and in some places it won't. I understand that. But for the majority of people in this building and others, I think it would.
You won't get an argument from me.
And that's why I said, your opinion actually matters to me in this, because I think I'm going to argue really hard for that.
Okay.
And where it can fit, I think we need to fit it. I just see a problem, and everybody else that comes up here, we're going to ask the same questions, and we're not going to really get anywhere. We're going to understand that some people are treated differently and others aren't. And I think we just need to move forward, understanding we know the answers to all these questions and trying to get to solutions. And I think that might be part of it, and maybe it won't. But I'm willing to die on that one. So we'll see where we end up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Schron.
As long as you're up there, and we just had
Let the record reflect Councilman Schron is present.
Oh, thanks. We just had a definition of the Fair Labor Standards Act, and I assume we're also talking about, we're not in that category where we had the salary got bumped up to the 47 and then got bumped back down, and we're not really, that's not an issue of any of the discussions we're having right now, is it?
No.
Okay, because I mean, some of us are wonks and we're into this kind of stuff because we have to comply with that. But this is not an issue where we're related to that. We're only talking about the definitional exemption of exempt employees.
I think that's what the question.
That was what the question was.
Councilman Miller posed. Yes.
But digging into that, of the $1.7 million that was audited, that was alluded. What, Mr. Dykes? Okay. Were any of those individuals that you just defined under the Fair Labor Standards Act paid overtime of that $1.7 million?
Individuals who are classified as exempt or non-exempt. I'm not sure what you're asking.
I'm asking you, you used a definition and you identified some of those categories as exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Yes.
And there are,
the response is yes.
And we had some audit. We had an audit by a third party, outside party, that said that $1.7 million, at least according to the audit, was improperly paid. Whether or not it's correct or not, we'll worry about whose definition it was based on legal, but at least under that person's definition. Were any of those folks in those definitions of exempt?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes, most were.
So most would have been exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act.
Yes.
But we, as a body, paid them.
Yes, but what I think is important to note, and I think the law department has issued an opinion on this, the Fair Labor Standards Act specifically, there are federal regulations that specifically state that an employer, both a private employer or a public employer, may choose to pay exempt employees additional compensation at the straight rate, as the county did.
And we have that in writing?
I have provided that.
No, not the opinion. The ability and the opportunity to treat everybody the same when we make those payments.
No, I can provide you with a copy of the regs.
So there would never be two employees in this room that could walk in. One was paid the overtime at straight rate that was exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and another would walk in right next to it and not gotten paid. Everybody
I'm not
would.
sure I understand your question, sir.
I'm just trying to go into the $1.7 million and get back to the definition of the Fair Labor Standards Act. Who was exempt, and then they in turn, we as a body paid them.
Almost all of those employees were exempt. You should note that in the set of employees that was audited, there were some employees that were considered non-exempt. And also in the data set, there were some employees that were in a bargaining unit. Those were, I think, inadvertent inclusions on the part of the auditor.
Okay, the non-exempt people, they were paid, I assume, time and a half. They would have been, if they worked overtime. They would not have been paid.
That's right.
They would not have been paid straight time.
But the payments that were made to those non-exempt employees were included in the 1.7 figure.
Okay.
In addition to the payments made to the unionized employees that were included in the data set.
Okay, and somebody authorized those payments, obviously by action.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Strawn. Councilman Hauser.
Just very quickly, because I know we have committee at whole at 4 o'clock. Being someone who worked for both the executive side and the honor work for the council side, I've seen it both hands. And to echo Councilman Gallagher's point, I think we have to do a better job. I think many directors have been getting 5 weeks for years now, and we have some employees at the county who, a single mother of two, who doesn't even have time to go pick up her children. And so as a collective group, as the HR executive staff and as the council, I look forward to working together to fix this issue, and most importantly, fixing the perception of this issue. And we don't have to have a back and forth, but just to echo what Councilman Gallagher was speaking of as well. And you don't have to, and we can go back and forth, but I've seen it firsthand. And so just as a collective group, let's make sure we all work together to fix this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hauser. All right, thank you, gentlemen. And let's again also be mindful. I think what we have discovered here is that there is a a definition of salaried and exempt that is not the typical definition, and that is an important point that we are happy to get out. I'm not sure who the next speaker was online, but I would respectfully request that you come forward. We will learn more about what it is. I think we kind of jumped to the end before we heard all of the presentations to try to find an answer, but I think the presentations will give us even greater understanding as why we have come to the position that we're in. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, Lindy Burt, Department of Public Safety and Justice Services. I'm here on behalf of Director Brandy Carney. She was regrettably unable to attend due to a conflict. So I'm here to talk about CCOMS, which is a division of the Department of Public Safety and Justice Services. CCOMS is a 911 call taking and dispatch center. It serves as the call taking center for any 911 call originating from a cell phone in a suburb of Cuyahoga County. Cleveland takes its own 911 cell calls. So the calls are routed to the center. Our job is to determine the location or confirm the location of the emergency, and then in turn, as quickly as possible, transfer that call to the appropriate dispatch center. We also serve as the actual dispatch for police and fire for Olmsted Township. So in the CCOM center, we have 4 supervisors and 1 lead operations supervisor. Those are exempt employees, and they have received, in limited circumstances, straight time payments for additional hours work. I should emphasize, this is a 24/7 operation, again, that, serves critical emergency situations for police and fire. So our job is we want supervisor coverage. We strive to have supervisor coverage over the call takers. There are 8 call takers and 9 dispatchers 24/7 during each week. The duties of the supervisors, they oversee the call takers and dispatchers. They serve in a decision-making capacity as needed during major events. They coordinate protocol as needed during major events. They serve to maintain calm and confidence among staff during complex incidents as they're occurring when the call center is flooded with calls. They also are there to be able to initiate regional requests for resources through systems that Cuyahoga County coordinates, such as Amber Alerts. We are the county agency for that, to issue that alert for MABUS, our mutual aid box alarm system, for another system called OTRAC, and hospital ER restrictions. Those calls would come in, and a supervisor would be the primary person to initiate those calls. Other duties include discipline of the call takers and dispatchers, scheduling and timesheet approval. They draft standard operating guidelines, and they generate activity reports. And they will also be the ones to handle non-emergency calls that would come in to the center from other requests from support from other fire or police agencies, from mayors during complex incidents, or chiefs who have inquiries about what's going on. They would handle a media inquiry, and any requests for additional support for resources from any of our communities. So anytime that the supervisor able to do these things, the supervisor taking care of these duties, enables the dispatchers and the call takers to focus on what they're there to do, that is to receive calls from the public, 911 emergency calls.
Thank you very much. I'll open it up to the committee if you have any questions. Councilman Miller.
Madam Chair, Ms. Burt, are the call takers themselves non-exempt and paid overtime in excess?
They're
of-
non-exempt, yeah. The call takers and the dispatchers are part of the OPBA bargaining unit.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. Who will be our next presenter?
Walter Parfiowitz, Department of Health and Human Services. For Health and Human Services, it's a coverage issue. Most overtime is worked by bargaining unit employees. Bargaining unit employees must be supervised. Currently, supervisors are not paid for overtime, cannot be mandated to work overtime. In most cases, do not work overtime. Leaves us with little or no supervisory coverage for overtime, limits what we can do. For HHS, this includes 3 supervisory classifications: social service supervisors, that's primarily children and family and senior adult services; employment family service supervisors at job and family services; and principal support officer supervisors at child support. Impacts 4 divisions: children, family, child support, job and family, senior and adult. I've got numbers of supervisors if you're interested. Our past practice, we were able to pay supervisors hour for hour beyond 40 hours straight time rate. Currently, our options, supervisors can accrue exchange time, but most have 16 to 21 years of service. They don't want the exchange time, and really, they just don't need it. The other option is to adjust work schedules to cover overtime. We do it as we can. If possible, we'd like to pay these 3 classifications, straight time, overtime for hours beyond 40. Questions? I mean,
Questions?
for us, it's all casework.
Councilman Gallagher?
And I won't hold you to this, but off the top of your head, a 4-day, 10-hour day work week for the 40, would that work for you? Helping you cut down on the overtime and the ability to adjust schedules? Or are you just at a point where you don't know?
No, I think it would work for us. I think we could adjust to it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Councilwoman Baker?
Thank you. Are the salaries that are exempt, however we want to say this,
Yeah.
are they, would you in your opinion say they're underpaid for the amount of time that's expected for the position that they're in? Are they underpaid to stay an extra 2 or 3 or 4 hours because it's the job that they've taken on? And I mean, where is it that you find justification? Is it just that we aren't compensating them enough for the extra time that a salaried employee sometimes has to put in? Where are you on that?
I think overall, the rates that the exempt employees are paid are not too far off from what the bargaining unit employees are being paid. There is a couple dollars difference, depends. Child support has a larger variance, but children and family services, job and family services, senior and adult, it's a lot closer. The rates are a lot tighter.
So if I may, so even though they're in a supervisory position, probably have perhaps more accountability of,
Correct.
you don't see them actually having or being compensated enough for what it is they do, and anything over 40, we should pay them more. Is that pretty
I
much
would
your
agree.
position?
Yeah, I would agree.
Thank you, Councilwoman Baker. Councilman Tuma? Did you have a question? Oh, Councilman Miller?
Madam Chair, Director, when you said that experienced supervisors generally don't want and need exchange time, is that because they mostly already have pretty close to their limit of exchange time in the bank, and also because they don't have time to actually take it because of their duties?
They do. I mean, they've got 16 to 21 years of service on average, my calculations. They've got the time. They don't really need any more.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman Miller. Okay, and I see we have 89 employees here under Health and Human Services and 84 that are credited to Job and Family Services that falls under that same umbrella. Is that the number of supervisors that is that the equivalent, or is there a difference?
That's the number for Job and Family Services. That's the primary area that we work the overtime in. It's all in casework, it's benefit eligibility and termination.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Shrine?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to that, is it, when you start working the overtime and the number of hours, is there a crossover point where it's just better to go ahead and hire the new person than it is to just to be paying the overtime, because you get to the same spot where, other than picking up the benefits, you get a fresh employee, they're not burdened by having to work the extra hours as it sounds like this group is, and you just go ahead and bring the employee on at that point in time.
Well, I believe so. I mean,
So why even go through the overtime exercise if it's better off just to go ahead and get the employee who would work the full time if we've got that, and not pay any overtime?
clearly the overtime we're working is to offset our vacancy. A lot of that is just for covering for vacancy that we have right now.
So the real answer on some of these overtime issues is to fill the vacancy slots.
Certainly.
so we don't have this. Because this is not, as we said, this is no way to run a railroad, just to keep throwing overtime at an issue like this. Now, if they have, if they're carrying over any of the bank time, and they come to the end of their work life, do they get paid for those banked hours?
You do. You get paid for all of your vacation time. You get paid for 25% of your sick time, up to 960 hours.
But also, what I'm talking about is the compensating hours for the exchange time.
That I'm not sure about. The answer is no.
Oh, okay. So they're not going. So that's part of the reason that there's no desire to get banked overtime. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, Council President Brady.
You had mentioned that part of the reason that we need some of these supervisors to work overtime is because I think basically you're saying we're understaffed.
Correct.
I don't want to get off track here, but if it's important to the issue, how understaffed are you?
The numbers I have today by division: children and family about 50, child support 21, job and family 36, senior and adult services only 1. Anywhere from 4 to 7% by division.
Thank you.
Welcome.
If there are no more questions, then I will ask our next presenter to come up, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad I got the presentation. I'll try to hit the highlights of this. This is the rationale I'd like to share with you for the use of extra straight pay for additional time for exempt employees at the medical examiner's office. Are they in screens ahead in front of you, or did we give pay?
Yes, we have the caseload screens. We also have PowerPoint packets if you were on the committee. Others we can provide for you. Thank you.
Great. I'll just hit some highlights quickly. This is a practice that has been done in our office prior also to the change in government, where we'll utilize exempt forensic staff scientists beyond 40 hours. It's primarily a tool for backlog reduction as well as the onboarding of new technology or new instrumentation. We anticipate that funding provided for this will continue into the future and probably be augmented into the future. I just wanted to mention that the real reason we've really needed this in the last few years is because of the dramatic increase in caseloads in our agency. This is just a summary of different things. We've tried a lot of things to try to keep our caseloads manageable, but the truth is, with the opioid epidemic especially, that's not really been something that we've been able to do. And I would add that, not only have the numbers of cases increased, the complexity of cases has also increased. This is the example I would cite as to where the opioid epidemic has pushed the office. We've had at least a 20% increase in mortality every year since 2014. And that could have been worse for other things like Project On, which we've supported, the distribution of naloxone. One of the things that concerns me is it seems like we've reached another plateau in the opioid crisis with fentanyl now. But behind this is something that's very similar to when fentanyl supplanted heroin, is that we had a short lull before a dramatic takeoff in mortality. And what we have now is the emergence of carfentanil, which is analogous in potency to fentanyl as fentanyl was to heroin. So I'm very concerned going forward that we're potentially going to see a lot more individuals dying and the caseload continuing to rise. I don't need to read over every number here. This has impacted lots of different segments of the community. The reason we need to address caseloads is the foundation of the medical examiner's office in serving the justice system and restoring public trust in the agency was the project that we started on the foundation of accreditation. We went from an office in 2011 that was unaccredited anywhere to the most accredited public sector laboratory in the United States. That is critical to how we function, and I think it was important with the transition in county government, especially on the heels of the scandal, to reinstate that confidence in the public that we were going to do a good, fair job. Extra straight pay for our exempt employees is critical to maintaining accreditation. A lot of these are tied towards backlog reduction and providing service in a timely fashion. One of the biggest things that is going to drive our use of extra straight time for exempt employees is our caseload. That's not predictable in my agency. We go through periods of time where it's feast and some periods of time where it's famine. And as that caseload fluctuates, we try to address that issue with using our already trained, already certified employees to fill in the gaps. If we lose this management tool, I think we're compelled to either start to consider hiring new people or doing something else that I really don't know what else to do, bringing in contract people. Bringing in contract people still requires us to train them on our instrumentation. Bringing in new employees is at least a 6-month lag period before they're actually functional. So that if we try to reduce backlog in that fashion, we're starting out so far behind the 8 ball, it's not a reasonable approach to take. Graciously, with the budget that was approved for my agency this year and next, we are adding personnel because this is a long-term problem. But if we rely solely on them, they're not in place yet. I'm not going to see work from them much before August, where they can actually be independently doing work. If I can't use backlog reduction through extra straight pay for exempt employees, we're just going to fall further and further behind. I don't know if that advanced, or did they go too far? This is the anticipated additional costs to the medical examiner's office over a 4-year period. It's nearly $3 million. This primarily manifests itself in a lot of things other than personnel, but a decent portion of this has been in personnel costs to the tune of nearly $800,000. We have been very active in seeking out alternate sources of funding outside of the general fund to pay for this. There are federal grants for DNA backlog reduction that we've competed for, and they've brought nearly $250,000 to $300,000 every year. Those grants are also used by other laboratories in this state for backlog reduction, including paying personnel in those laboratories to work extra time to keep the backlog down. We've done other things, including take on some work from the Bureau of Criminal Investigations in our drug chemistry laboratory, which is going to provide nearly $500,000 of funding to my agency to address their needs as well as our needs. We expanded capacity. We need people to work those instruments. Again, if I'm trying to bring in people to do this work from outside, I'm losing time. And if there's another laboratory that can do them, we set ourselves at a disadvantage by not being competitive. I don't want to bore you with every detail here, but given our current caseloads and budgetary constraints, I can't do these things without our forensic scientists working over 40 hours a week. It's just not going to be a tenable practice. So I will cut to the chase. It's essential, as I said, for our office to have the option to pay additional straight time for backlog reduction. These special projects, some of which, I don't mean that to sound like we're looking for extra work. Some of these special projects include the implementation of new instrumentation. That was critical in the opioid epidemic as the drugs started to change and the concentrations became significantly smaller. We also brought on new technology to analyze DNA mixtures, which no other laboratory in the state has. So we're trying to stay ahead of the curve. These are things that we can pay for primarily with outside funding. We paid a certain amount of money in 2017 for extra straight time. 80% of that was not funded through the general fund. I think that if we have a plan that's developed and agreed upon and participating personnel are there, we should pay them hour by hour for the extra time they do. I do not have a big pool of people I can necessarily bring on board to do this work. We already have flex schedules to 4 10-hour days, especially for people coming back from maternity leave, and I still think that we're competing with the same issue that we have. I think, one of the other things I would say is anytime we've ever really asked for extra straight time for pay that did come from the general fund, and I still think this is the appropriate idea, we come before county council and ask you to give that your blessing. So I still think that that's a good practice. That's pretty much everything in a nutshell. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from, yes, Councilwoman Baker?
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. How many extra hours on the average do you usually pay over 40 in your higher peak demand time?
I can tell you that in over the course of the year in 2017, we paid about $80,000 in extra straight time. I don't know that month by month because it fluctuates given backlog changes.
I guess
But that's roughly our number.
Yeah, I'm asking not so much in money, but how many hours are we asking our exempt employees or salaries employees to put in above their 40 on an average that they are needed beyond that?
At a busy stretch, I would say that could be up to like 10 hours a week.
10 hours. And it is your opinion, I guess, that we are not paying them enough in their salary or exempt pay that would account for the ebb and flows or the feast or famine type of scenario that you have, that to work 5 or 8 or 10 hours over in a very difficult time where perhaps in other times of the year it would be just the 40 and an easier workload, that salary that we're paying them to work those jobs isn't enough. If they needed to stay an extra few hours, you don't think they're being paid enough to compensate for their time?
It's a tricky question because I think if I look at salaries for other laboratory workers around the state, we're fairly competitive. But I've already lost multiple drug chemists to the Bureau of Criminal Investigation in Ridgefield because they can make more money working overtime down there. So we're at a competitive disadvantage when we don't do extra straight time for people working. I don't think our salary is the fundamental issue so much as we aren't compensating people who could be compensated for the extra hours they work.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Schrown?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So other labs are paying overtime, whether it be Franklin County, Hamilton County.
Bureau of Criminal Investigation.
Bureau of Criminal,
yes.
yeah. They're paying overtime
I know the
in
Bureau
all
of Criminal
those counties.
Investigation is they're the ones who take my employees.
Yeah, they're the local guys, but we're trying to measure it against other counties. What are they doing with their labs?
I don't want to be dogmatic. As I say, that's my closest competitor, so I know their practice. I do not know for Hamilton or Columbus doesn't have a setup like us. That's a police department. I think those are union employees who would be paid for overtime for extra hours. Hamilton County, the laboratory is under the coroner's office, and I don't know what their setup is for extra hours. I'd have to look into that one.
Well, one of the thing that about your department, unlike some of the other departments here, you actually do have a revenue source that's covering. It sounded like 80% at least of what you're doing. You got $5 million or $500,000 from the state. It looks like you got $400,000 from the city, and you got a $140,000 grant. So when you all total that together, that's covering the bulk.
There's more grants too.
Are there more? Okay. Well, I'm only seeing the ones that were visible to us here on the slides.
Sure.
So it seems to indicate that unlike some of the other folks who are up here talking, you're driving the extra hours, but you're taking on outside work, and that's what's driving a big chunk, it sounds like, of your extra hours that you're doing. And so the county is gaining brand recognition for the quality of your work, doctor, and it's also being covered with the bulk of it is being paid by outside third party, not through the general fund, unlike a lot of the other conversations. So I see a distinction clearly with what you're doing here. You're actually producing revenue out there. Thank you.
Thanks. No, that would be break my heart to kind of hand back so much money. It's over $1 million.
I had 1.4 million for you on that.
Any other questions? Questions, all right, thank you very much. Our
Thanks very
next
much.
presenter, please come forward. Oh, that completes our presentation. Okay, thank you very much. At this point, what I would like for the committee to do is, we've had some healthy dialogue relative to the 40 hours, paid hour for hour beyond the 40-hour work week. I would respectfully request if you have any further questions or suggestions that you provide them to our staff, and we will review them and adjust accordingly, if you will. And if there are no further questions, comments, or concerns, then we will adjourn. All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for your time.